Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan, MS Pearce. This is a sort of breaking news, all that happened yesterday, and a small analysis over one particular political party in the UK, the Reform UK party, which is effectively kind of MAGA UK style, if you like, make Britain great again, as some of them have actually said. Indeed, you've seen Nigel Farage at the CPAC Conservative Conference in the US and at Trump's rallies wearing the MAGA cap. You've seen a lot of policy overlap. The Reform UK voters, as the new poll that came out recently shows, are much more in favour of Donald Trump than any other political party voters, and actually more in favour of Vladimir Putin than any other political party, which is fairly worrying. But this all kind of makes sense. So if this is a party that's most like MAGA in the US, and MAGA is the movement in the US that's most sympathetic to Russia and most kind of anti-Ukraine, as we can see from the actual administration at the moment, then you're probably going to see that the Reform, one would predict that Reform would be most pro-Russia, anti-Ukraine out of all the parties. Not saying that they are universally, and in fact, you know, they aren't hugely in favour of Putin, as you would imagine, but the stats are more favourable to Putin than any other party. But you would predict that there would be that larger rejection of pro-Ukraine stance than other political parties in the UK, and kind of that's what we're seeing. So we're just going to look at this today with the news that came out yesterday that the ex-Reform UK Wales leader, so Reform UK is this kind of what used to be, for those who don't know, UKIP. UKIP were the UK Independence Party. They were the Leave Party for Brexit. And UKIP, after Brexit, they still kind of exist a bit, but they really essentially became the Brexit Party. And then the Brexit Party became Reform UK. And it was trying to move away from the idea that this is a single movement, single policy party, to a broader party that could campaign on wider issues. And actually they did pretty well in the last election and divided the Conservative Party in exactly the same way as MAGA has divided Republicans. So although, you know, in the UK you've got two parties, Reform UK and the Conservative Party, and Reform UK ate into Conservative electorate so much that they divided the vote, and Labour got in on the back of that. Essentially, that's what happened. In the US, there aren't two parties, there are one party, and that one party has Reagan Republicans, equivalent to to the big C Conservatives in the UK, I would say, and MAGA within Republicans, whereas you've got, as I say, Reform and Conservatives in the UK. Okay, so ex-Reform UK Wales leader has been accused of taking Russian-linked bribes. So I'm going to read through this. Former leader of Reform UK in Wales has appeared in court accused of accepting bribes to make statements in the European Parliament that would benefit Russia. Nathan Gill, 51, so obviously this is going back some time because the European Parliament, we're no longer in that. Nathan Gill, 51, from Llangefni in Anglesey, is facing 8 counts of bribery and 1 count of conspiracy to commit bribery. The court heard Mr. Gill, who was a UKIP and later Brexit member of European Parliament between 2014 and 2020, was alleged to have received money from his co-defendant and former Ukrainian politician Oleg Voloshin. So this will be, no doubt, a pro-Russian Ukrainian. He appeared at Westminster Magistrates Court by video link on Monday, speaking to confirm his name, date, birth and address. The defendant is alleged to have been tasked by Mr. Voloshin on at least 8 occasions to make specific statements in return for money. The court heard the statements made in the European Parliament and in opinion pieces to news outlets such as 112 Ukraine were, quote, supportive of a particular narrative which would, quote, benefit Russia regarding events in Ukraine. This is one instance. Imagine how much is going on throughout Europe. We heard of that Latvian MEP that was similar. You got the 2 Irish MEPs that you can imagine they're no longer in position, but you can imagine they would be in a similar boat as your man here. I think this would be happening widely across Europe, and it's something we've got to be really aware of. A spokesperson for Reform Wales said Mr. Gill, quote, is not a member of Reform UK. anymore. A lawyer for the Crown Prosecution Service told the court that Mr Gill was stopped at Manchester Airport on the 13th of September 2021 under anti-terror legislation. His mobile phone was seized and evidence was found he was in a professional relationship with Mr Voloshin and had agreed to, quote, receive or accept monies in return for him performing activities as an MEP, the court heard. Barrister Richard Link for the CPS told the court Mr Gill agreed to make statements in the European Parliament for money and would, quote, tend to benefit Russia in relation to events in Ukraine at that time. The Crown said the alleged offences were carried out during Mr Gill's time as an MEP and before the UK left the European Parliament on the 31st of January 2020. He was an MEP for almost 6 years and briefly represented North Wales in the Welsh Parliament. Mr Gill was first elected as a UKIP MEP in 2014 and joined the National Assembly, as it was then called, in 2016. So you can imagine that Reform, or UKIP as it was then Brexit, then Reform, these are the party MPs that if you were to be the FSB, this is where you would be concentrating. Like I've just said, the polls suggest that the voter is more likely to support Putin than anyone else, far more likely to support Trump, see Trump as favourable than any other political party in the UK. So this is going to be your fertile ground for influence operations. And indeed, that is what we are seeing. So what else? He was Assembly member for just over a year before he was replaced by Mandy Jones in December 2017. He served as UKIP's leader for Wales and was briefly an independent before joining Reform's predecessor, the Brexit Party, in 2019. And then he led Reform's 2021 Welsh Parliament election campaign. It's not clear precisely when Gill ceased being a leader of Reform UK Wales, but the job has not existed for some time. The Crown said charges were authorised against Mr Voloshin, but he was not in the jurisdiction. And Mr Gill of Anglesey was granted bail on the condition that he surrender his passport, is not to obtain international travel documents, and not to contact Mr Voloshin. He is due to appear at the Old Bailey on the 14th of March. So then you've seen this kind of denial from Reform. You've had Richard Tice, who is effectively, was the leader of Reform before Nigel Farage came back in. Nigel Farage owns the party. It's not a political party, actually. It's a private entity, Reform UK. So Richard Tice said, great to be with Nathan Gill. So Richard Tice denied Reform say the man who is accused of taking bribes to make favourable statements about Russia in the European Parliament is nothing to do with them and has never been a member. A picture paints 1,000 words, as Richard Tice is next to Mr Gill. And Richard Tice in 2021 said, great to be with Nathan Gill, leader of Reform UK Wales, campaigning today. Wales needs to reopen, never lock down again, and focus on cutting taxes, cutting business rates, cutting daft regulations, and less government waste to create higher growth, more jobs and better wages. Says Richard Tice next to the guy he denies has anything to do with Reform UK. So there is that. And then you start seeing other interesting images like Nigel Farage next to Mr Voloshin's wife. Former Brexit Party MEP Nathan Gill, who was arrested for taking Russian-linked bribes from Oleg Voloshin. Here's Nigel Farage with Voloshin's wife. Okay, interesting. Now, yesterday there was a big sort of debate, bunch of speeches in Parliament where lots of MPs were, and I'm going to do probably a separate video on this because I've got so much to talk about with regard to this. Essentially, you had cross-party support, complete support for Ukraine from all the political parties, apart from one. And all the parties were, interestingly, different members from the parties were slagging off Trump. It was quite revealing. They're not happy in the UK Parliament with the American position at the moment. But here's one MP talking about the absence.
I'm sure that our Ukrainian allies will listen to the steadfast support in this House and feel heartened, and also notice whose voices are absent from the House at this point in time. But can I ask the Foreign Secretary?
Who is not there? Reform UK. So I know I will have some Reform UK voters and people who are Reform curious, and I know that because some of you said so on the threads. And someone said the other day, I almost voted for these guys or want to vote for them, but then I'm just holding back because of Ukraine. Well, I can tell you 100% they are not good for Ukraine. Reform UK, they don't even turn up to debate this stuff and to give their support for Ukraine in the House of Commons. They are as I say, not good for Ukraine. So let's look at a few other nuggets that give us a sense of the sort of people in Reform UK as parliamentarians and what they've thought previously. We'll remember that Nigel Farage was an MEP previously for UKIP and then Brexit Party. And when it was a Brexit Party MEPs, who then became Reform UK, voted against plans to tackle Russian propaganda in the European Parliament. So a resolution seeking to upgrade EU counter-disinformation unit passed easily, but who voted against it? Brexit MEPs. Please be wary that if anyone is connected to Russia, if anyone is taking backhanders at the moment, or over the last however many years, and you can find some, I think in the Conservative Party, there's a lot of influence from Russian oligarchs within the Conservative Party, and this is a worry for Boris Johnson earlier in the war, but it's Reform, stroke Brexit, stroke UKIP, where I think you have to worry. Remember that Nigel Farage was really... what did he say? That Putin was the politician he most looked up to. He said that, albeit in 2014, but 2014, what happened then? Annexation of Crimea. In fact, Barry Gardiner from the Labour Party calls out Sir Rupert Lowe. He's a Reform Party bigwig. He's an MP for the Reform Party. This was, it appears to be on GB News. Barry Gardiner from Labour taking Lowe to task here.
You blustering because you won't answer the question. Which one of the charges that was laid against you, charges in the NHS, whether it's looking to stop people being fired on the spot? That was a private member's bill I put through Parliament just 3 years ago to stop P&O, who fired 800 people just like that, had people waiting to take them off the boats. That's what you supported in the bill that was going through. You remembered against that.
Angela Rayner's employment rights bill is going to cost the private sector £5 billion.
Every single one.
That's not going to help. That's not going to help Britain. That's not going to help Britain.
Putin?
I've never supported Putin.
No, but Farage hasn't he?
No, not recently.
Sorry? Oh, recently? What about in GQ magazine when he said that this was the guy that he most respected in politics?
But that's Nigel's view. I've never said that.
Well, he is the leader of your party. You want me to justify what Keir Starmer does,
but you're not... those comments were made in 2014, weren't they? Were they made in 2014?
Do you disagree? Well, they were made at a time when 5 people had just recently been executed in Russia for opposing Putin.
Over 10 years ago.
For opposing Putin. Okay?
Over 10 years ago, and you're quoting something that was said 10 years ago. No.
Because it goes to the heart of the man. Who does he respect? He respects a tyrant. He respected a dictator who had assassinated 5 people who had the guts to stand up against him in Russia.
Absolutely brilliant there from Barry Gardiner, really holding Rupert Lowe to account there on account of his party leader, Nigel Farage. And he says, well, that's not me. Yeah, but you give me hassle about Keir Starmer, right? And if you're going to give me hassle about Keir Starmer, then you can answer for your party leader. And then we had that Newsnight appearance with Nick Robinson of Nigel Farage himself.
We provoked this war. It's, of course, it's his fault. He's used what
But we provoked the invasion of Ukraine.
Yes, and very interestingly, once again, 10 years ago when I predicted this, by the way, I'm the only person in British politics that predicted what would happen.
And it's only a tiny little excerpt, but I commented on the whole interview when it was out, this was some time back, where basically Nigel Farage blamed, and he got into a lot of trouble for this, a lot of hot water with some people within Reform as well, who were like, hang on, I support Ukraine, I'm former armed services, this is not cool. But Nigel Farage blamed NATO for the Ukraine war. And that's Nigel Farage. So be under no illusions as to who Nigel Farage is. When he is hobnobbing with the MAGA group, the MAGA both voters and politicians in the United States at rally after rally and CPAC and whatnot, be under no illusion that he has that very similar outlook with regard to Ukraine and with regard to Russia. When you have him in a GQ magazine, albeit in 2014, saying the politician I most look up to in the world is Vladimir Putin, you've got to start worrying. And you're thinking, how much money has changed hands here? Why is it that you were voting against disinformation, an EU disinformation unit, like as a member of the European Parliament? Why are you hanging around with the wives of people who are giving money to your politicians in order to make pro-Russian statements in the European Parliament and Parliament? You know, this is all incredibly worrying. So I would just say, you know, if you're a Reform supporter, Reform voter, just be wary. You might agree with them on all sorts of other things. I mean, I don't personally. You might, or interesting that for last election, they did do a couple of, because they realised they got a lot of working class votes, so they went for some economic left policies, which was really interesting. So they had an all over the shop manifesto, and some of it I'll be like, oh, actually, that's a pretty good idea. That's a pretty good idea. But broadly speaking, you know, the heart of who they are in Reform, I would disagree with. And I think on Ukraine and Russia, they're clearly in often a very uncomfortable position, should we say it that way. Anyway, let me know what you think about. There's so much more I can say about Farage's position on Russia and things he's said in the past. But it's no surprise to me that money is changing hands, and that Russian interests have been represented by, in this case, a Reform UK parliamentarian as a result of basically being bribed. That's enough from me on this topic. Take care, and I'll speak to you soon.